Hello, friends. Welcome back. We are in the episode 6 of our foundation video tutorial, and we are building this online taxi booking service. Before we close the last episode, we had started building the services. I had shown you how a service is built, and we had started building the web app. Right? We had built one app, although it was a very minimal. It just had one field. So now I've gone ahead and completed all the services that the services you see here on the left, and I've also completed the app. So I'm going to walk you through all these elements so that you can extrapolate what we did last time uh, up to here. Before I do that, I just want to revisit our app and made some changes. I want to run you through those changes. First is we have changed our search page. We've removed some fields and we've trimmed it down. The original full search, which we had earlier, let's take a quick look. It has some extra fields. And this is also there. So I'm going to walk you through both the pages. And let me return to our new home page. The reason I have reduced this or trimmed this is that I want to show you how a page can be built in ZOAPIIO without any programming whatsoever. Because this is a page where you just type and you submit and some results come back. But in the longer page version of the page that we had, there was some interactivity. You populate a field, something else happens. And so there was programming involved. So I want to show you both. The one where there's no programming required. Of course, there are several APIs that we have to build. I'll walk you through those as well. So let's get back. This is a service we're working on. Providers. I've changed some names. You'll find some names are different, but that's all right. Just part of cleaning up. So earlier we had this function here, which was doing the fetching of providers. Now what we've done is we have copied that function into a routine. Okay, it's exactly the same thing that we had earlier, but now we put in a routine. And what we've done here is just we are invoking that routine. So it's effectively the same thing. Just a couple of things I want to point out. The first one is that you will notice that there are some things like slash underscore n, slash underscore n, and slash underscore out. So these are special pseudo nodes, if you will, which point to the two parameters that were passed to the routine. So if you look at the declaration or the definition of this routine, the routine can have two parameters, and here we have assigned two nodes. Now, at the time of calling, you can pass any node, but while while building the routine, we need to know what will be the structure of the node that will be passed. So the two parameters, we just for the sake of simplicity, we're calling them in and out, but they can be anything, right? So now we have just replaced those hard-coded names with the parameterized ones, and it's everything else is exactly the same. And we come back here, and when we call this, we pass the actual node, which we are passing as parameters. Now let's look at the other functions, get locations, which is pretty much the same like before. We create the request, call the service, and process the response. Now let's look at the get codes. This is a slightly involved service. So a couple of things. First is that in this we are making use of the session. Okay, right before we end, we are copying the response that we are sending and we're copying it into a session. So what happens when you save something in the session is that next time any service gets called in your project, this contents of the session would be available to you. System automatically persists everything. Now, how this persistence is done is you can control that here. You usually when building the front end app, we link it to the payload or other. There's a subtle difference. I'm not going to go into that now. So your front end app uses a JWT and sends it every time a request is made. So we're going to use that to identify which session it is, and we're going to store it in the database. Simple. Everything else system automatically takes care. Another thing is now the get quotes is function is slightly enhanced to handle the request coming from both the search pages. So get quotes is actually the one that responds to the search. Okay. So here under, so now we have two request formats. You see this uppercase. These are the fields which are coming from the new search page, and everything else that we had already seen last time, they are the ones we have programmed for. So here what we do is first thing is we execute a function called the rationalize RQ. What it does is it sees which request it is. So if we see that these fields, the one with the uppercase are present, that means it's coming from the new page. And we just do a little extraction. We extract the latitude, longitude, and we copy it into one of these parameters which our request already knows how to handle, the standard latlon. And before we do it, we also execute the get providers, because in the old page, the get providers was a function which is a part of the home page. Now we don't have it, so we fetch the providers and we take the first provider and we use that as our provider. So so it works on the short form as well as the long. So we run this before proceeding with get quotes. So this is able to handle both the formats. Now everything else is pretty much the same, except what we're doing is, if there was no PID is the provider ID, which means that we were not able to get a provider from the new request format or the old request format, we just simply return. That means empty response will be sent back. Rest is same. We populate the request, we call the service, and we take the output and copy. So this is a slightly bigger output, so we have to do some more lines of code exist, but everything else is the same. So now this is the server side. I mean, I hope you're able to understand as to really the amount of programming we've done in building these APIs is absolutely minimal, and that too, we just using there's no programming knowledge that we started with. We just use this selector or this panel on the left, and we can call any of these commands. These are all pretty well documented, and you can read up that documentation, but it's really very, very straightforward. Okay, now coming back to our application, let's come back to the now in this app. What we've done is we've changed the opening page to the home alt, which is the alternate home page. Okay, and we have created this home as one of the links. We in the main nav you will see that we have a full search function, which actually links to the home page, which was the older home page. So both the pages are available on the UI. So let's get back to our home alt, which is the one we are doing now. So this is the layout, and I'm going to. Most of it is pretty simple in the sense we had already built a template of this page. So let's see what this element looks like. It's an app element. It's of the type input, and we expect it to contain the latitude followed by a comma and a longitude. Similarly for the other one. So the selection part of the top page is just plain configuring the elements, right? And let's look at the search button. In the older page, this search button was actually a button, and in this case, it is a submit. So what this means is that the action on this button is automatically handled by the system. And what it does is it takes everything that's there on the page, validates it, and automatically submits the page back to itself. So if you go back to the home alt, the next page on submit is blank, which means it will submit back to itself. So when we submit this, and the next time when the page loads, it's going to come back with the results. So now let's see what we have done in the results. So the results is a view, and and let's look at the data binding first. So now this is a view that we are binding to a data source. And in our case, it is the same service which we just looked at, which is the get code service. And this get code service, it needs to be, we need to specify the schema of the response, right? So when we configured the service, this was the response. It was automatically picked up, and now we have this configured. Then we have to create a binding. So now we have the source, now we have to bind. And we're binding it to the element called quotes. So let's go back and just take a quick look at what this response looks like. Okay, this is quotes. Right, so we're binding it to quotes. So that means whatever is contained in quotes will be rendered in the results page. Now the quotes happens to be an array. That means it is a repeating element. So additionally, what we need to specify here is a container layout. Container layout is, so normally we specify just a layout, but whenever we're binding to an array, we also provide a container layout. That means how the repeating rows would be handled. Okay, so when we say table, what this means is that the contents, which are the individual elements. So now let's look at one of these elements. So taxi name. Okay, so we have a taxi name, and we have to bind a value to it. So I'll just, as soon as I type something here, it tells me what fields are available to bind. And this list is coming from what was bound to the parent element, which was the results. So we have bound an array to the results. Now here we need to create the set which represents just a single row. So in binding it to the name, we are binding it to the name belonging to one element of the array. And the same set would be repeated. So we will end up getting a layout in the form of a table. So let me just recap. We bind the view to a data source, which is a service. We provide the structure of that. We bind it to an element. And then each element inside it is bound to a sub element of the structure where the results was bound. Right? And we gave it a container layout, which is table. There are other forms of container layouts available. You can try those. You can even have a row, column, and everything. But table seems to be most convenient. This is what we're using. Now, to make this page function, that's all you need, right? We did not write a single line of program. All we did was create the structure, create the right kind of bindings, and that's about it. Pretty much now this makes this page functional with absolutely no programming at all. And the server APIs is, of course, we've seen how easy it is to program those. Now, so this is a simplistic case, and I especially created this page to highlight this simplicity. But we'll still go back and look at the full search page. So let's just run this service now. We type the source, latitude, longitude, and we select the date of travel. And we do a search. So what's happening in the back is there is it's everything that happened just now was automatically handled by the system. There was no additional programming that was incorporated into the page itself. So the page is a fully functioning page on its own. Okay, and the following steps would continue. So now I'm going to break from this episode because and when we come back in the next episode, I'm going to walk you through the main search page and the programming, the JavaScript programming that we have created. So I'll see you in the next episode.